James Comer is the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, which has a lot of responsibilities, and one of them includes the Federal Communications Commission, which is supposed to be an agency. It's got 5 commissioners. The Democrats are in charge, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. They chair the thing. George Soros has an investment company, which he's trying to buy radio stations all over the country. He's bought a number of Hispanic stations and flipped them to left-wing stations. And as of this morning, the FCC voted 3-2 all the Democrats to hand him 220 radio stations and one of the biggest accumulation of radio stations ever. But there's many problems with this. Number one, George Soros is using over 25% investment from foreign investors. These are American radio stations. Number two, the FCC has slashed and sped up the process before the election to try and hand him those stations by circumventing the national security review process when you have more than 25% invested by foreign entities. And I want to ask our friend James Comer, this has never happened before. It's getting almost no attention except here and there, conservative press, a few independents. The Democrats have just handed George Soros, their biggest sugar daddy, an ideological leftist, 220 American radio stations with all this foreign investment. How the hell does he get away with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, among other things, we view this as a potential...
Louder, Mr. Producer. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Chairman.
Oh, yeah. Well, we feel this is an attempt to interfere in the 2024 election by the Federal Communications Commission. I mean, they have never done this before. You're exactly right. By all appearances, they're not just expediting this, which when has the government ever expedited anything? They're not expediting this. They're bypassing what is an established process, and it appears just to do a favor to George Soros. And not to mention the fact that he's biased, he spreads misinformation, and what's he going to do to conservative viewpoints and conservative stations and conservative shows? I mean, we feel that there are a lot of negative consequences to this, and this is just another government agency that's supposed to be independent, supposed to be fair and balanced, that appears to be taken over by left-wing extremists.
No, and there's no accident here because it's before the election. I'll give you my own example. I work with Westwood One, which is a very upright company owned by Cumulus, and they got notice about 2 weeks ago that WPHT, the old WCAU, I'm from Philadelphia, that's the biggest of these stations. It's a huge, historic station, one of the first stations, Bill Paley's first station on the East Coast. It is a huge station with a huge reach. Obviously, David McCormick's running for the Senate, and you have all these other people and so forth. Oh, well, we're going to drop your show. Your last show was on October 5th. We just looked at our ratings. I'm tied with the highest number on the station. So obviously that was ideologically driven. And I'm not just playing for myself. This guy's taken 220 stations that has Dan Bongino and Glenn Beck and Charlie Kirk and go on and on and on. And the idea that this is supposed to be a public license with a public interest. You know, you got all these billionaires and conglomerates that buy these stations and so forth, but they have to meet requirements, basic requirements that they're doing a public service. They can't treat these stations as their own little puppy dogs, and they can't treat them as their own little ideological basis. This is an attack on free speech. Now, you wrote a letter to the chairperson of this committee, and you wanted answers by October 3rd. Tell the nation what you did.
Well, we've started the process for a subpoena. You don't just issue a subpoena that can be upheld in court. You know the law better than anyone. We've taken sincere steps to try to get information, communication. We want to know also why they decided to, number one, expedite this process, and number two, bypass their normal review process. If they do not respond within a week, which is ample time, then we will issue subpoenas, and we're going to bring these people in for depositions because I think the American people deserve to know what's really going on with the Federal Communications Commission. I mean, this has never happened before. Everything that the FCC has supposedly stood for in the past would go to encourage competition, would encourage free speech, would encourage diversity of opinions and viewpoints and ideologies. But what we're seeing here is clearly Soros is a politically active, I would argue the most politically active liberal in America. He's the biggest donor to left-wing organizations. He just came out last week that this Congressional Integrity Project, which has been hounding Jim Jordan and myself throughout the entire Biden investigation, spreading disinformation, harassing, intimidating whistleblowers, intimidating witnesses, harassing me, harassing my family, with paid protesters, banners flying over big events in Kentucky. This was funded by George Soros.
Unbelievable.
This was funded by Soros, and now he wants to buy all these radio stations, and
But he doesn't want to do it honestly. He doesn't want to do it the old-fashioned way.
And there's supposed to be checks and balances in this, and that's what the FCC is supposed to be. And it looks like they're not only not doing their job, they're complicit in this left-wing takeover. Now,
at some point, I'm just curious, is there any way to undo these things? Or if the Republicans take the White House and take this commission, I mean, it seems to me they ought to take another look at this and determine whether this was actually a lawful and legitimate acquisition of 220 radio stations by a man who's using an enormous amount of foreign money to help subsidize this purchase, which triggers this national security review. Maybe it's ultra-virus, that is, without authority.
This certainly should be a priority. Obviously, the quickest remedy is a new administration and a president that appoints fair, knowledgeable people to the FCC, like Brandon Carr was when Trump was in office. And this is the easiest path forward, but this is going to be a priority for the Oversight Committee. We're not going to let up on it. We're going to work with other committees of jurisdiction. I mean, there's no journalist in America that can say with a straight face that this doesn't stink to high heaven.
And the confidence of so many American people thinking the FCC is sitting there, making sure these licenses are really put to a public use, making sure these oligarchs aren't really putting their finger on the scale, to literally destroy the process that's in the rules for the FCC that includes a national security review with all this foreign money by George Soros. These three people are hacks. They're flacks. They're not going to do their job. They probably got direction. You deliver this to Soros. Are you considering perhaps also Alex Soros or George Soros? I've never understood how these two escape scrutiny. I've never understood how, with their fingers everywhere, their money everywhere, their effort to turn democracy and free speech on its head, at least here, you've got their fingerprints, their DNA, you've got their photograph, you got everything.
Well, that's certainly a consideration. I think we're going to begin with SEC employees, the bureaucrats. I mean, this is their job to prevent something like this from happening. We've screamed at the top of our lungs on the Oversight Committee about China's influence and other countries' influence in spreading disinformation and getting a footprint in anything that would have an impact on our national security. And the flow of information, the flow of news, of accurate news, that is a threat to our national security. And to know that so much of this money and this takeover is foreign money, and to expedite the process and bypass all the normal channels of review is another breathtaking step in the slap of democracy by the Biden administration, by the Biden-Harris administration. This is the real threat to democracy. The decisions that the bureaucrats in the Biden-Harris administration continue to make against conservatives and against working-class people of America.
This administration, these ideologues don't believe in the First Amendment anyway. We see what they did when it came to the laptop and when it came to questions about COVID-19 and the lab, and we see these 51 frauds. National security, they lie in their letter. You can go on and on. The disinformation board that they set up at the DHS, We have at least 2 federal courts that have ruled that this administration is the most anti-First Amendment administration. I mean, the stuff that they found at Twitter, the stuff that they have found, and then this, I can guarantee you, Chairman Comer, if this were a Republican billionaire who was a big supporter of Republicans and it was a majority on the FCC, this would be marquee news everywhere, would it not, that they handed to a billionaire 220 stations by cutting corners?
There's no question. The hypocrisy here is breathtaking.
Yeah, it's just so we're going to stay on top of this, Chairman. We'll keep in touch with you. And as this goes on, because we're going to fight for free speech no matter what. We're not going to roll over and play dead. This is our country, and it's just too damn important to surrender. Thanks for dogging this thing. It's very important.
Yes, sir. We're not going to let up, and hopefully if they don't comply with our legitimate request for information, then they'll be receiving subpoenas as quickly as possible.
That's really important. God bless you, my friend. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
That's Chairman James Comer. That's the House Oversight Committee, and he's not messing around.